Hey, it's Jackson. Welcome to another episode of the Science of Happier Work. In this week's edition, or this month's edition, I should say, we're going to basically answer the question of how can I find more meaning or sense of purpose at work? And so I should start by saying that oftentimes this can be kind of like sound like a really broad, out there, sort of pie in the sky topic. And it can be. You may feel that deep calling for your work or want to pursue that or have a spiritual connection to your work. And I think that's great if you have that. But we're going to get a little bit more into the practical psychology. And there's really a simple framework that I think applies to nearly any context for this. And we sometimes use the term strengths based, values aligned. And that's what we'll explain in the next few minutes here. But think about it like this. Let's start with a story. Let's say you have two people. You have Jeff, who is, 25-year-old male, and Sarah, who's a 25-year-old female. And they're both working in management at a large e-commerce company. And so they have the same responsibilities. They supervise a team of about 15 employees. Each one does a lot of like data entry type work. So they're white collar, but they're still technically staff. And they're responsible for managing the performance of the team as well as process improvements for that business unit. And so one of the people really just struggles with dealing with the one-to-one performance conversations and having those tough conversations and sort of building that team dynamic. But she really, really loves the data analysis. You get this massive Excel file and you run macros on it and you do different studies and optimize things. And she's so gifted and she just loves it. But she feels kind of drained by the whole people management, performance development type thing. You have Jeff, on the other hand, who cannot stand to be stuck in Excel with his head down doing all the analysis, but he really excels in building rapport and building trust with his team, but also having difficult conversations and really using them as coaching conversations to figure out like, how can this person improve? And so maybe Jeff then is overall, despite the little bit of Excel, very happy in that work and it feels very meaningful to him, whereas Sarah feels kind of burnt out. Well, why is it? They both have basically the same role. They're making the same amount. They're at the same level in their career, same responsibility. What could be going on here? So, of course, now this is kind of a semi-real talking from experience here. And of course, it could be that the direct supervisor for one of the two is mean or one's better than the other. But let's say they have basically the same kind of relationship with their supervisor. A lot of it is something I just hinted at there. And it may be that Sarah and Jeff have very different sets of strengths and very different sets of values or interests that show up in their work, right? We said both of them have some things they like, some things they don't like. But maybe for Sarah, she really, really, again, loves this analysis and this critical thinking piece, but she doesn't have a lot of these influence strengths. Whereas Jackson is kind of the opposite. And so because Jackson maybe leans into his strengths of influencing and people management and development, he feels more meaning and purpose in that role. It's like, sure, we're not saving the world here at this e-commerce company, but it's like, yeah, I mean, this is kind of engaging. I feel pretty engaged when I show up at work, and I think I'm having an impact on my employees' lives, whereas Sarah just feels kind of stuck. And so this is what I'm getting at here in this video podcast, where we think about the meaning and purpose a lot of times, right? It's not just about like this big story of saving the world and having an impact, although it's great. It absolutely can be that, especially if you are in maybe a role like healthcare or something where you're really impacting people's lives. But it also can come from your values and then using your strengths to have an impact in the organization. So when we dive into the psychological literature, there's really, I would say, maybe not a perfect consensus, but I think a very good, well-researched theory of meaning. It comes from Dr. Martin Seligman, who was kind of the founder of positive psychology. And he says it really simply, that meaning comes, the feeling of meaning comes when you use your unique strengths to have an impact on something greater than you. And notice again, it doesn't mean saving the world, doesn't mean all that stuff. It can really just be using what makes you unique and talented and things that you tend to enjoy doing because you're inherently better at them, And that's a lot of times where the psychological satisfaction comes from. And so there's two commonly used diagnostic tools for this, and you can use those or you can do this more intuitively. So one of them is the Clifton Strengths, which is offered by Gallup, very well researched tool. And then there's also the VIA Strengths, which I believe came primarily from some of the folks around Martin Seligman and those psychologists. But in either case, they basically do the same thing. You get a list, and there's up to like 30 of them, but I really recommend focusing on the top 3 to 5. That based on your answers to a bunch of questions takes about 30 minutes. It says, hey, here are your top strengths. And here's the fascinating thing is that almost every single person will have a different top few strengths in a slightly different order. So for example, my top 3, I believe, are learner, input, which means I love to collect information and organize it and store it. And woo is the third one, which means that I enjoy like winning people over, winning people to my way of thinking. So knowing that means that I can sort of think about my work a little bit differently. As I think about careers or even ways of working on my own business, I can say, well, how can I leverage this ability to get in front of people and win people over? And how can I leverage this ability to love learning and collecting information and storing it? Okay, well, if our business, we decide, hey, we should probably write a book and try to get some publishers for it. That's perfect. I love learning. I love gathering all that information. I can get everything together, outline the book, write it, and then call up the publishers and say, hey, you got to read this book. It's awesome. But at the same time, if we wanted to analyze our digital marketing performance and then build out a new marketing strategy and analysis are lower on my strengths. And so naturally, I'm not going to be as drawn to that work. So you can use the diagnostic tool, or like I said, you can kind of think about this intuitively. And I've found a useful kind of term for it, as I've heard from some other tools, is the system for identifying motivated abilities. And that piece about motivated abilities. So what are things that you are naturally motivated or drawn towards doing, and that you have a high level of ability or capacity within? And so going back to Dr. Martin Seligman's definition, if you can hone in on some of those unique things that you really excel in, especially that you have a natural propensity towards, of course, your productivity will be way better, but we just have the first piece of meaning, right, is using and applying those regularly. Then we said the second piece is using it to have an impact on or serve something greater than you. So this really means understanding the context of your role in whatever organization you're in and trying to connect with who is that end user. So my business partner, Paul, tells a really interesting story about how when he was doing a big consulting project for a massive paper mill, that the employees were really uninspired and burnt out and felt like this just sucks. A simple thing he did that actually it made some pretty significant improvements to the morale was they looked up all the different end use cases for this, basically this paper pulp material that they made. They made like however many hundred thousands of pounds of it every day. And they looked and they found that it was used sometimes in adhesive bandages that were used to administer medication to people in hospitals, that it was used sometimes in diapers that were given to children. And had all these different use cases. And so they would put up these posters around the office, of a baby wearing the diaper or, a doctor applying this bandage. And that maybe sounds a little cliche, right? And it's not like a immediate quick fix that all of a sudden you're going to be totally inspired and in love with what you do. But what you're doing there is connecting the work those people are doing to the end user, to the impact it's having on the world. And so again, even if your role is like this story was, you're in an e-commerce company and, you're getting important buyers, important materials to help keep the world moving, sure. But even if it's just saying, hey, what is the impact I'm having on the people's lives of the people I manage that, this Jeff person, who is definitely not me, was one of their favorite supervisors of all time and helped them feel way less stressed at work. Or could it be, hey, I know that when I get my work done in this department, it has this impact on the people in finance, and it has this impact on the people in customer service, or it has this impact on the people below me. So it's just trying to keep in mind, what is the actual effect of the work I am doing? Can I see some of the results, even if it's just benefiting my team or the people around me? Or, and this is an important final point, what is the impact to you personally? right? The context of your life. Again, even if you have a job that's rather uninspiring, if you say, hey, I know something important to me, and kind of the bigger picture of my life is I love to travel. And so this job maybe isn't perfect, but it provides me a good, comfortable salary and good work life balance so that I can take trips and visit my friends or whatever it is. So when you put those two together, what you're starting to get at is how can I use my unique strengths and what is the connection to something greater, whether it's the context of your life and the people you care about, the people within the organization, or of course, ideally, your organization and your work on some scale contributes to creating a better world. So protocol that you can use to do that is first, I'll include down below a couple of those tools to identify your strengths. But even if you don't want to do that, just take some time to step back and think. A really useful question for this comes from the author James Clear. He says, what feels like fun to me, but like work to others? And so you may think about, what am I naturally motivated to do? And I'm usually pretty good at. So that's the first step, is to list a few of your strengths. Then look at your role and think about, how could I apply more of these? And I'll talk you through how to do that in just a second. But then the final piece, right, is to say, okay, well, what is the impact my work is having on the organization? And that could even be a comment with your conversation with your manager or your team, like, well, how does this work fit into the context of the organization? It could be thinking about your own life personally, or of course, the broader mission of the organization that you're in. So a final piece on how to structure and shift your role a little bit. I think this one, it helps to hear an example. So I was working with a very senior enterprise leader in the Army, and I talked to him about this, and I said, look, your role, let's say broadly speaking, is to manage the people strategy of this state's National Guard, right? The big mandate, but that's what you do. Now, if your top strength, let's say, was analytical, what you could do is you could really focus on looking at all of the data you have and setting up new processes to get better data on your people. Attrition rates, retention rates, behavioral health scores, whatever you want to look at, and try to think, well, what is the financial implication of that? Why are people leaving? Why are people joining? So you really get into those details. On the other hand, if your top strength set was influence or relator, which means building relationships with others, maybe you would focus more on, hey, once a week, maybe twice a week, I'm going to go just try to talk to a middle level or even new frontline supervisor and just try to have a good conversation with them about, hey, why are people joining? Why are people leaving? What are the challenges? What are the HR processes we could do better? So now look what just happened there. In both cases, you are doing really good work at getting after your objective of improving the people strategy of this military organization. But the way that you go about doing it, you're leaning into your strengths. Now, of course, there are going to be certain things that you maybe just have to do. You have to fill out this monthly report. You have to have the performance conversations. You have to do XYZ things. But all this is trying to shift your orientation about how you do the work and doing more of the things that you have strengths in. So that's the main piece, but there's one other piece here that I think is worth highlighting. And remember the model I showed at the beginning is strengths-based and the values aligned. So not only are you using your strengths to have an impact, but you're doing it in a way that is aligned with your values of what matters to you personally. And importantly, this is not just the values that you are socially conditioned to have, right? Which is, oh, I want to be a really good person and I want to just be the best. I don't know. Like, those are great values. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying you should be a bad person, but a lot of times when we just quickly think of our values, they're really kind of biased and influenced by the world we grew up in. And sometimes they're often very generic. And so we have down below a tool that you can use that you can, by the end of it, have, I think it's 5 of your top values in order of priority that are most important to you. But again, if you don't want to use the tool, this can be done with a bit of reflection. It's just thinking back maybe on some experiences you've had where you really felt like you were at your best and you loved what you were doing. And it wasn't about the results you got or the approval you got from other people, but stuff that really felt important and meaningful to you. And maybe you just list out, what are the top values, right? If I were to ask you, what matters most to you? And you may say, well, it's family and then faith and then fun. I don't know. Well, so once you have those values, again, you can then think about how your role does or does not fit with them and how you could shift your role to fit better with them. So let's say a couple examples again. I'll just use, let's say you're the CFO of a hospital, a made up example, kind of made up. I work with one of them. But your top three values are family, faith, and fun. Okay. Well, if you're working 60 hours a week, every single week, already you know that you're not going to have much time for family, faith, or fun. So you may need to assess and say, okay, how can I reduce my workload slightly? But beyond that, you may think, okay, well, I know faith is important to me. So how is the work I'm doing here improving health outcomes in this hospital, living in a way that's accordance with my spiritual values? And I think you'll find that if you're doing a good job of improving patient outcomes, it is aligned with those values of faith. But then you might also think, well, maybe I could start an employee interest group, an ERG, an employee resource group, I should say, around, faith or whatever your denomination is, right? Of course, it's not mandatory, but hey, once a week we talk about living our Christian values at work. I don't know, and then it's optional to join. There you go. And then finally, fun. So are there any pieces of your job that are important, but that you can have more fun with? Whether it's starting meetings with a little bit of a joke or telling an occasional story, or once a day doing a 30-minute coffee chat where you just go on a walk outside the building and have a fun conversation to build a relationship with one of the people that supports you. Again, all these things are just thinking about how can you shift your role a little bit so that it is in line with your values. And if you were to find that no matter what you do, that role just cannot align with, in this made up example, family, faith, and fun, then you may need to pursue a new role. That's the point. Because if you're not living in alignment with your values, even if you're using your strengths and getting really good results, of course, you're not going to feel that sense of purpose and meaning. So there you have it. I think I gave you a few individual applications, right, of strengths-based and values-aligned, uncovering what work that you really thrive and feel intrinsically motivated to do, identifying the impact of it, and then making sure it's aligned with the things that matter most to you in your life. And what maybe I'll leave you with is that this is also something that you can try to bring to the people you lead or even the people you work with. A couple ways to do that are giving them some formal assessments, but even if not, it's just asking them in performance conversations or informally, hey, what do you feel like is easy for you and that you do really well, and how can you do more of it? Conversely, hey, what is important to you? Like, what do you value, right? Because you maybe have one employee that says, I'm all about like achievement. I want to be the best. I want to grow, and I want to be the CEO in 5 years. And then you may have another employee who says, hey, this work's important to me. I do really good work, but honestly, I just really love weightlifting. And like, that to me is like a big passion. And so, I do my work to take care of myself, but like, I really want to be a pro bodybuilder. Okay. Very different things, but then what's of value to them, and you can help them to see the value of it in the work. So for example, if the first person is doing a really important project, you may say, hey, this is really exciting. You're going to develop a lot of skills here that are going to really skyrocket you and set you up to be the CEO in 5 or 10 years. Whereas that same project to the bodybuilder type person, you might say, hey, I know this project is going to be a little bit of extra work, but if you do a really good job on it, they probably move up the next level. And maybe there'll be a way that you can have a little bit more free time coming out of it so that you have more time to do your bodybuilding or do whatever. So again, none of these are like obvious, perfect examples every single time. But by having this lens of strengths-based and values aligned, you can better learn what is meaningful and purposeful to your people and to yourself. And I think that no matter what context you're in, you're going to be able to feel a little bit more meaning and purpose in your work. So thanks for watching this video or listening as the podcast that we're working on. Down below, you'll find references to this. As always, you can find more resources to help you be at your best in both work and in life at happinessmeansbusiness.com. That is our private sector arm where we advise businesses and organizations on things like sales, retention, operational performance, safety, etc. We also do one-to-one coaching. On the other side, you can go to warriorleadertraining.com, which is our military and law enforcement practice where we do much of the same work. So thank you again for your time. Wishing you happiness and success, and I'll see you next time.